From the most heated 70-second hole finishes to players collapsing under immense pressure, these are the 20 greatest golf moments in US Open history. And first we start with number 20. Imagine playing the biggest round of your life and not even knowing what your score is. The 2016 US Open at Oakmont was already brutal. Fast greens, deep rough, major pressure. But for Dustin Johnson, things got weird on the 5th green. He was standing over a par putt when his ball moved, just barely. Johnson backed off, called in a rules official, and was told no penalty, play on. So he did. He kept grinding, kept building a lead. And then, out of nowhere, on the 12th tee, officials pulled him aside. They told him they were still reviewing the incident on 5th. Translation, he might get a one-stroke penalty, or he might not, while he was still playing. Johnson didn't know if he was tied, ahead, or behind. He just had to keep playing and hope. Later, the USGA explained their decision. Under Rule 18-2, a player can be penalized if their actions are deemed to have caused the ball to move, even if unintentionally. In Johnson's case, they said it was more likely than not that grounding his putter near the ball had caused the movement. He hadn't addressed it. He didn't touch it. But based on timing and proximity, they gave him the penalty anyway. In the end, he was assessed the stroke, but still won by 3. But the damage was done. Not to his scorecard, but to the USGA's credibility. Next up, number 19. During the second round of the 2000 US Open at Pebble Beach, one of the most dominant performances in golf history, Tiger Woods came dangerously close to disqualification due to a forgotten detail and a risky moment. The night before, Tiger had taken several balls out of his bag to practice putting in his hotel room. He forgot to put them back. That meant he started the round with fewer balls than usual. As the round progressed, the supply was now critically low. Still unaware of how few he had, Tiger stepped onto the 18th tee box, a brutal par 5 with water down the left side. He pulled his tee shot into the ocean, losing the second-to-last ball he had in the bag. That's when he casually turned to his caddy, Steve Williams, and asked for another ball. Steve gave him the last ball in the bag and quietly suggested he take an iron off the tee, just to play it safe. But Tiger looked at him and said, "Why would I hit an iron if I'm playing this well?" Then he stepped up with driver again. Steve was panicking inside but knew better than to rattle Tiger in the moment. Years later, Steve said, "I have never, ever been that nervous. I am standing there with my backside trembling. My butt cheeks were absolutely clamoring." Had Tiger lost that last ball, he would have had no legal way to finish the hole, and under the rules, he'd be disqualified from the tournament. But of course, Tiger being Tiger, he safely found the fairway with his second drive and went on to complete the round. He'd not only avoid disaster, he'd go on to win the tournament by a jaw-dropping 15 shots, the largest margin of victory in major championship history. At number 18, one of the most chaotic meltdowns the US Open has ever seen. The 1999 US Open at Pinehurst was already a nightmare for most players. Lightning-fast greens, wicked pin placements, and barely a breath of forgiveness anywhere. But no one cracked quite like John Daly. On the par 4 8th hole, Daly found himself in trouble. He was behind the green, facing a nearly impossible uphill putt. He gave it a go and watched the ball roll right back to his feet. Tried again, same result. And then he snapped. As the ball rolled back a third time, Daly walked right up to it and smacked it while it was still moving. A clear rules violation and an automatic 2-stroke penalty. He carded an 11 on the hole. But that wasn't the end of it. After the round, Daly let it rip, blasting the course setup, the USGA, and even saying he no longer considered the US Open a real major. He finished the tournament 29 over par, dead last among those who made the cut. But that moment on the 8th hole, that wasn't just frustration, it was full-on rebellion, and one of the most unforgettable outbursts in US Open history. Number 17 starts with a putt and ends with a tragedy no one saw coming. The 1999 US Open at Pinehurst had already turned into a battle for the ages. Two men trading punches on one of the toughest tracks in golf. On one side, the flashy veteran, Payne Stewart. On the other, a young Phil Mickelson, still chasing his first major. As they reached the 18th hole, it was dead even. The pressure? Unbelievable. Stewart's tee shot found the fairway. His approach left him with 18 feet to save par. If he missed, there'd be a playoff. If he made it, he'd win his second US Open. The crowd held their breath. The putt dropped. dead center, and Stewart let out one of the most iconic fist pumps the game has ever seen. Leg straight, arm high, pure emotion. He'd done it. He'd held off Phil. He was the US Open champion once again. But what no one knew was how quickly it would all be taken away. Just 4 months later, Payne Stewart died in a tragic plane crash. He was 42. That putt, that moment, it became something bigger than golf. It became the image the world would remember him by. Arms raised, fearless, and full of life. Coming in at number 16. And let me tell you, you won't believe this one. So here's this UPS driver who plays the round of his life, only to get disqualified by a hot dog. Nick Barrett wasn't your typical name on the tee sheet. No endorsements, no private jets, just a 31-year-old UPS driver from Maryland. And a dream. He had already beaten the odds just to get here, making it through local qualifying with a bogey-free 68. Now, in the final stage at Woodmont Country Club, he was holding his own, shooting a solid 73 in round 1. The US Open at Oakmont was suddenly within reach. And then he went to lunch. While grabbing a hot dog, Nick stood up, patted his back pocket, and froze. His scorecard was still in there. Unsigned, unsubmitted. He sprinted back to the scoring tent, but it was too late. The rules were clear. No signature, no score. Disqualified. A dream, crushed, not by a bad shot, but by a technicality. And Nick? He owned it. Called it a total gut punch. Said he hoped others could learn from his mistake. One of the most heartbreaking DQs you'll ever see, and proof that in golf, sometimes the smallest things hurt the most. The 2006 US Open at Winged Foot had been a war of survival. Tough course and brutal setup, players hanging on for dear life. But somehow, Phil Mickelson found himself on the 18th tee, leading. 1 hole away from winning the US Open for the first time in his career. He needed just a par, that's it. 1 clean hole, and the US Open would finally be his. But then came the driver, and the decision that changed everything. Instead of playing it safe, Phil pulled a driver and hooked it way left, into the trees. Still, there was a chance to recover, but his next shot clipped a branch and dropped almost straight down. Now, in full scramble mode, he tried again, and plugged it deep in a greenside bunker. You could feel the meltdown happening in real time. By the time he tapped in, it wasn't for par. It was for double bogey. Just like that, Jeff Ogilvy, who had already finished at +5, was the US Open champion. And Phil? He stood there in disbelief, summing it up in one brutal sentence. "I am such an idiot." It was one of the most shocking collapses in major championship history, on a hole he should have never lost. For number 14, Max Homa tried to do it all himself, until it all slipped away in the final moments. Heading into US Open qualifying, Max Homa was in an unusual spot. He'd just parted ways with his longtime caddy, and instead of bringing in a replacement, he made a bold call. He'd carry his own bag. It was hot, it was a long 36-hole day, and it was all on him. But to everyone's surprise, Max played well. He fought through the grind and posted a 5-under total, good enough for a 5-man playoff for the final qualifying spot at Kinsale Golf Club. And that's where things got painful. A 3-putt on his last hole in regulation had already cost him a guaranteed spot. Then, in the playoff, Cameron Young snatched the last ticket to Oakmont with a birdie on the first hole. Homa still had a shot at getting in as an alternate, but on the second playoff hole, he 4-putted. Just like that, the chance was gone. Turns out, carrying your own bag might build character, but it doesn't help you read greens. At number 13, it looked like the tournament had slipped away until one shot flipped everything on its head. Larry Nelson was hanging in there at the 1983 US Open. After barely making the cut, he'd gone on a tear, posting back-to-back rounds that had him suddenly tied for the lead with just a few holes to play. But Oakmont doesn't hand out wins. It demands something special. And on the par 3 16th, Nelson found himself in a nearly hopeless spot, staring down a putt that most players would have gladly taken a 2-putt from. He stepped up and gave the ball a gentle stroke, just enough to get it moving. It rolled up the slope, caught the ridge, and began to break hard to the right. For a moment, it looked like it might come up short, but then it kept rolling, and somehow it dropped. A 60-foot birdie putt on Oakmont's glassy greens in the final round of the US Open. That single shot gave him the lead and changed the outcome of the entire championship. A quiet contender, a miracle moment, and a win that no one saw coming. Which brings us to number 12. It started with a casual lunch and turned into one of the greatest comebacks the US Open has ever seen. The year was 1960, Cherry Hills Country Club. Arnold Palmer, already a fan favorite, trailed by 7 shots heading into the final round of the US Open. While eating lunch before teeing off, Palmer turned to golf writer Bob Drum and asked, "What if I shoot 65? Would that be enough?" Drum didn't even blink. He birdied 6 of his first 7 holes, shot a front 930. The crowd was losing its mind. And as Palmer charged, a 20-year-old amateur named Jack Nicklaus quietly held his ground. He wasn't flashy, but he was fearless, finishing second and showing the world a glimpse of what was coming. But this day belonged to Arnie. Next, number 11. It was all right there. The moment, the title, the redemption. Dustin Johnson had played the final hole of the 2015 US Open to absolute perfection. A blistered drive, a gorgeous approach. He stood over a 12-foot eagle putt on the 18th green at Chambers Bay with a chance to win his first ever major. All he had to do was knock it in, and the nightmare of near misses would finally be over. The crowd held its breath. Johnson lined it up. The putt rolled, but slid just past the edge. Okay, no problem. Tap in for birdie, force a playoff with Jordan Spieth. Still in it. But then, the absolute unthinkable. He stood over a 3-footer, one of those no way he misses this kind of putts, and then he did. The ball lipped out. Just like that, the US Open was over, and he wasn't the winner. The silence said it all. A 2-putt collapse when all he needed was 1. Dustin Johnson went from potential champion to heartbroken runner-up in seconds. It was the kind of moment that sticks to a player's legacy, especially when it's not the first time. For a long time, DJ was the guy who could almost win a major, and on that Sunday in Washington, the curse felt real. Here at number 10, an unknown 17-year-old just dropped one of the most ridiculous stat lines in US Open qualifying history. While the pros were grinding to make it into Oakmont, a high school junior from Georgia named Mason Howell was casually lighting the place on fire. 2 rounds, 36 holes, 18 birdies, 0 bogeys, and a total score of 18 under par. Read that again. This kid made a birdie every other hole, on one of the toughest days in golf, when even PGA Tour players were missing out. He went 63-63 at the Piedmont Driving Club in Atlanta. That's not qualifying, that's domination. By the end of the day, Howell had earned co-medalist honors and a spot in the 2025 US Open at Oakmont. Not bad for someone who probably still has a prom coming up. While big names like Ricky Fowler and Max Homa were heading home empty-handed, this teenager was booking his ticket to the biggest stage in golf. Mason Howell didn't just qualify, he exploded onto the scene. At number 9, this story starts with a collapse and ends with a comeback that shattered the record books. Just 2 months earlier, Rory McIlroy had one hand on the green jacket. He led the Masters after 63 holes, and then completely fell apart. Quadruple bogey, broken swing, crushed confidence. It was the kind of meltdown that could haunt a young player for years. But Rory didn't disappear. He showed up at the 2011 US Open with something to prove, and by the end of the week, no one was questioning him anymore. From the opening tee shot at Congressional, he looked like a man on a mission. A bogey-free 65 on Thursday and a 66 on Friday. He broke the 36-hole scoring record and then kept pushing. But the moment everyone remembers came on Friday at the par 4 8th hole. Rory was in the fairway on the par 4 8th, sitting pretty after a perfect tee shot. It looked like a textbook birdie setup. Short wedge in hand, pin in sight, nothing fancy. The plan? Stick it close, tap in for 3, move on. But then came the swing. The ball flew high and landed just past the hole, and slowly started to trickle back. It rolled back toward the cup and dropped. An eagle. Out of nowhere. And from that point on, Rory didn't just lead the US Open, he owned it, finishing at a record-breaking 16 under par to complete one of the most dominant performances the tournament has ever seen. Coming in at number 8, this putt came out of nowhere and changed everything. At the 1990 US Open at Medina, no one was really talking about Hale Irwin. He was 45 years old, hadn't won a major in over a decade, and wasn't exactly on anyone's list of favorites. But somehow, by the time he reached the 18th hole on Sunday, he had a shot, if he could make something happen. He stood over a 45-foot birdie putt, long, uphill with a tricky break. Most guys would have been thrilled just a two-putt. But Irwin gave it a smooth roll. The crowd got louder as the ball kept tracking, and then it dropped. Dead center. The place went nuts. Irwin celebrated with a huge fist pump, high-fived a fan, and jogged off the green like he just won the whole thing. And in a way, he had, because that putt forced a playoff. The next day, he came back and won it. At 45, Hale Irwin became the oldest U.S. Open champ ever, all because he nailed the one putt no one thought he could make. Now at number 7, this wasn't just a win. It was something golf had never seen before. At first, it looked like any other U.S. Open. Tough course, stacked field, high expectations. But by the end of the week, there was only one name on anyone's mind: Tiger Woods. The year was 2000, the setting, Pebble Beach. And from the very first round, it was clear something special was unfolding. Tiger opened with a 6 under 65, the lowest first round ever recorded in a U.S. Open at Pebble. While everyone else was scrambling to stay close to par, Tiger was making it look like a casual stroll down the fairway. And then came Friday. The winds picked up. Pebble's greens turned nasty. No one broke par except Tiger. He shot a 69. Everyone else? Completely wrecked by the course. By the weekend, he was playing against himself. No one else was even in the conversation. The rough was ankle deep. The greens were like glass. Guys were carding doubles and triples left and right. But Tiger, he didn't make a single double bogey all week. And the final margin? 15 shots. The largest in major championship history, a record that still stands. No one finished under par, except Tiger. He was 12 under. It was so dominant, so absurdly lopsided that pros and fans were left just shaking their heads. He didn't just win a major, he made it feel like no one else even belonged on the same course. Now, here's number 6. It's the final round of the 1994 U.S. Open at Oakmont. Ernie Els is chasing his first major, and the pressure is sky high. Then comes the very first hole, and his tee shot dives straight into the thick, gnarly rough. But that's not the problem. The real issue, his ball ends up right behind a massive TV crane. Obstruction? Yes, but removable? Also yes, because this thing was on wheels and had been moved several times that day. The rule says, if it's movable, you move it. But the on-site rules official Dr. Trey Holland saw it differently. He declared it a temporary, immovable obstruction and gave Els free relief. That drop gave Els a clean lie instead of the jungle he was actually in. He still made bogey, sure, but that better lie likely saved him from something way worse. And here's the kicker. The USGA later admitted it was a mistake. He never should have gotten that relief in the first place, but by then, it was already history. Els made the playoff and won the tournament. But in a tournament where every shot counts, that one drop may have been the difference between winning and watching someone else hoist the trophy. You've made it to our top 5 of the greatest moments in U.S. Open history. And this incident is one of the strangest things Phil Mickelson has ever done on a golf course, and that's saying something. It was the 3rd round of the 2018 U.S. Open at Shinnecock Hills, Mickelson's 48th birthday. But instead of cake and celebration, he gave the golf world chaos. On the par 4 13th, things were already going sideways. He had missed his bogey putt, and the ball started trickling down the slope, looking like it might roll clean off the green. And then, Phil ran after it and hit it while it was still moving. Fans gasped. Commentators were stunned. This wasn't a casual tap. It was a deliberate swing at a ball in motion. He was immediately hit with a 2-stroke penalty, finished the hole with a 10, ended the day with an 81, his worst U.S. Open round ever. But it wasn't just the score that caused the uproar, it was why he did it. After the round, Phil said it was strategic, that he knew the rule and took the penalty on purpose to stop the ball from rolling off the green. The reaction? Mixed. Some called it smart, others called it disrespectful. And suddenly golf wasn't debating scores, it was debating sportsmanship. At number 4, the moment a U.S. Open contender roasted the golf course harder than the field. The year was 1970. Hazeltine National Golf Club was hosting its very first U.S. Open, and not everyone was impressed. Enter Dave Hill, one of the top players that week, and absolutely not a fan of the layout. After shooting a solid 69 in the second round, reporters asked what he thought of the course, and Hill didn't hold back. He said Hazeltine lacked only 80 acres of corn and a few cows, like it was some half-finished farm rather than a major championship venue. The quote went viral, well, 1970s viral, and earned him a $150 fine from the USGA. But Hill wasn't done. He followed it up with, "Whoever designed this course had the blueprints upside down." The wild part? Despite all the noise, Hill finished runner-up, just behind Tony Jacklin. His game was strong, but his mouth was louder. And that week, his legendary one-liners overshadowed everything he did with a club in hand. Next, number 3. What started as a coronation turned into a collapse and ended in one of the coldest finishes in U.S. Open history. The final round of the 2024 U.S. Open at Pinehurst, number 2, felt like Rory McIlroy's moment. 10 years without a major. Critics circling, pressure mounting. But there he was, leading by 2 shots with just 5 holes to go. He was playing smart, in control, steady, and then it started to slip. On the 15th, a short miss, bogey. On the 16th, another misread, another bogey. Suddenly, Bryson DeChambeau was back in it. And while Rory was unraveling, Bryson was grinding. Fairways, greens, pure focus. By the time they reached the 18th, it was all square. Rory left himself 4 feet to save par. And missed. Again. Then came Bryson. His ball in the sand, 55 yards out, needing par to win. And he delivered. A perfect bunker shot to 4 feet. One last putt. Dead center. Game over. Bryson DeChambeau wins the U.S. Open for the 2nd time. And Rory, another runner-up. Another major heartbreak. It was a duel, a collapse, a clutch finish, and one of the most gut-wrenching swings in momentum the U.S. Open has ever seen. And here we are at the runner-up. This wasn't just impressive, it was historic. Winning 1 U.S. Open is hard. Winning 2? Nearly impossible. But winning back-to-back U.S. Opens? That's something golf hadn't seen in nearly 30 years. And then came Brooks Koepka. In 2017, he bulldozed Aaron Hills with power and precision, finishing at 16 under par, tying the U.S. Open scoring record. It was his first major, and he made it look easy. But anyone can get hot once, right? That's what people said until 2018, when Brooks stepped onto the tee at Shinnecock Hills, one of the nastiest, most unforgiving U.S. Open setups in recent memory. The greens were slick. The course was borderline unplayable. The scores, sky high. But Brooks didn't blink. He battled through the chaos, outlasted a surging Tommy Fleetwood, and shot a clutch final round 68 to finish at +1. Good enough to win by a single stroke. That win didn't just silence the doubters. It put his name alongside legends. The first player since Curtis Strange in 1989 to go back-to-back at the U.S. Open. And finally, last but not least, the big number 1. And let me tell you, you can't script this stuff. It's 2008. Torrey Pines, Tiger Woods is limping, grimacing, wincing after nearly every swing. What no one fully knew at the time? He had a fractured tibia and a torn ACL. That's not a metaphor, that's an actual broken leg. And somehow, through the pain and the pressure, he kept himself in contention. Then came the 72nd hole. He needed a birdie on the par 5 18th to force a playoff with a Rocco Mediate. Under enormous pressure, he delivered one of the most clutch sequences of his career. A huge drive, a gutsy second shot, and a perfect putt to tie it up. But it wasn't over. The next day, they returned for an 18-hole playoff. Same situation. Tiger still limping, still hurting, and somehow still right there. By the end of the playoff, they were tied again. It went to sudden death. And on the 91st hole of the tournament, Tiger finally beat Rocco with a par to win his 14th major title. Looking back, it wasn't just a great win. It was one of the toughest and most unforgettable performances in the history of sports. He played with a broken leg and won the U.S. Open. How do you even compete with that? Before you go, don't miss the next wild moment we've got lined up. It's right there in the center. Enjoy.